Steve is a high school freshman who enjoys basketball, that's all I had, hanging out with friends, his iPhone, this is all I got, music, and a girl named Lauren. Steve does all right in school, but does not necessarily enjoy math the way he does the previous list. Steve is sitting in math class one day and a teacher introduces a topic of slope. Steve knows the word slope as in ski slope. He likes to snowboard too, but is not sure what it has to do with math. With a teacher like Mr. Bartlett, though, they will no doubt be talking about math, not snowboarding. Steve doesn't understand the first time the subject is introduced, but he doesn't have to do it himself in class, which he's psyched about. The teacher says they will be practicing more in the next class. In the next class, the teacher asks for volunteers to perform the task, and Steve doesn't volunteer. But a couple other students do, and he tries to understand what they're doing, but he doesn't get it because they finish so quickly. The teacher then puts the students in pairs, and Steve ends up with Jose, a student who says the task is easy, and because Steve thinks that he doesn't want to seem stupid, he agrees. Jose does their problems while Steve nods his head and says he thinks the calculations look right, even though he doesn't do it himself. When the full class works through problems, Jose raises his hand to do one on the board in front of the class, and so he and Steve need to go to the front and put a problem on the board. Steve is worried that Jose will ask him to do something, or the teacher will ask him a question, but again, he gets by without having to say anything. The teacher asks if everyone understands the task and says that it's important that they do because they will be moving on to the solving equations that require the students understand slope. The teacher encourages the student to ask him for help if they need, even though there has been much discussion about rise over run that Steve did not understand. He assumes that there will be more practice like he did that day with Jose, and he will eventually understand the topic, so again, he doesn't say anything. The next class, the teacher introduces a new topic that assumes students understand slope. As the students begin to put the new numbers on the board, Steve's eyes get blurry and his head starts to hurt, and even his breathing is faster. He feels like the room is closing in on him and he's falling down a hole, and everyone in the room seems to understand what the teacher's talking about except for him. And when the teacher distributes a practice worksheet, poor Steve basically spends this class staring at the numbers like they were Chinese and pretending to use his calculator as a distraction so that it looks like he's working. Fake calculator. The next day, the teacher begins the class with a surprise pop quiz to see how many students can do the new skill. The quiz has 10 questions on it, and after the quiz, students trade papers with another classmate, and the other classmates score the work. Steve gets a 1 out of 10. I didn't really try, he says to the classmates when the papers get back, and the teacher collects the quizzes, and the class ends. The next day, at the start of the class, the teacher pulls Steve aside and says he noticed his score at the quiz and asks him to come and see him after school. And Steve has to arrange to get extra help, and he calls his mom and tells her he will miss the bus to stay after for help in class and that she will need to come and get him after that. Don't stay after 3:15. When Steve gets to his teacher's room that afternoon, the teacher goes back to the beginning and explains it more slowly. Steve sorts of gets. When he says it, sort of gets it. But when the teacher asks him to do it, Steve gets stuck on some aspect of the problem. When the teacher explains it to him again, Steve starts to understand. And after a few practice problems, Steve feels the light bulb go off in his head and it starts to make sense. Steve thanks the teacher for his help, and the teacher tells him the next time he doesn't understand something in class, he needs to let him know. The teacher tells him that as he moves up through the grades in high school, teachers will increasingly expect him to monitor his own understanding of what's being taught in the class and to ask for help when he needs it. And as he leaves, Steve's teacher tells him that in college there were 300 students in some of his classes and that there was only a midterm and a final exam. He said that if you didn't understand something, you wouldn't know until those big tests, which counted for your grade. And then it was too late to go back and learn what you didn't understand. He tells Steve that in college, you have to go to what is called office hours for help from your professors, which only happens for a few hours on 1 or 2 days each week. Professors don't come to you. Mr. Bartlett encourages him to get good at asking for help now so he won't have trouble when he gets to college. Steve thanks him and wonders how he can find ways to know when he needs to ask for help so he doesn't find the walls closing in on him and feel like he's falling down a deep hole.